When I first read The Catcher in the Rye, I was in eighth grade, and I did not get it. Not really. Not the way you're supposed to get it when you're young and the world has not finished assembling the particular machinery it intends to use against you. I remember Holden wandering through New York like a ghost who had not yet been informed of his death, going on about phoniness. This word always felt too simple for what he meant by it. And at one point, he was standing somewhere high and imagining the fall. Not the dying, but the landing. Not the pain, but the way he would look afterward, splattered on the concrete, which is to say, he was not afraid of the end, but the indignity of it. I think about that now. The whole enterprise, the markets, the politics, the media, all of it runs on the assumption that you will accept the indignity and call it opportunity. I look around and I see people holding the microphones, and there's nothing behind the performance. Nothing that would survive contact with a genuine question. There is no charisma, not the kind that changes rooms or shifts the temperature of a generation. In the financial media, you can count the real ones on a single hand. Becky Quick, Sarah Eisen, David Faber, and the rest are filling a silence that would be more honest left unfilled. These people grew up together. They came through the same institutions and dinner parties and conferences. Over the decades, they set the edges of what could be said and thought and believed. An Overton window, they tend like a garden wall. And when anything slips outside of it, even slightly, even reasonably, they absolutely lose their minds. Not because that thing itself is dangerous, because its existence implies that the wall was never really where they said it was. My generation got handled a sequence that reads like a chapter title from The Civilization in Decline. September 11th, then the Iraq War, then the Great Financial Crisis, then Me Too and Hillary and Trump and COVID and the lockdowns, and now AI. Each one arriving before the previous one had been understood, let alone resolved, so that the feeling is not of a discrete crises, but of one long unraveling dressed up in a different costume. In the 80s, if you had a good attitude and showed up, you became a millionaire. It's not nostalgia. That's simply what happened. The door slammed shut behind it with a finality that the people on the other side have never acknowledged, because acknowledging it would require them to admit that what they call meritocracy is really just the compound interest of having been born at the right time. I never worked in an institution. People want to know who my mentors were, as if knowledge only accounts when it is transmitted through proper channels, stamped and approved and filtered through the credentialing apparatus that exists primarily to protect the credentials of those who already have them. I had mentors, plenty of them. I also had YouTube and Twitter and books and the willingness to sit alone in a room for years and figure it out. To take clips here and a segment there and a passing comment from someone I would never meet and build from those fragments and understanding that surprises people, precisely because it did not come from where they expected it to come from. The amount of this kind of self-directed learning required just to be economized, just to have a seat at the table where the conversation is actually happening, is staggering. It is not something everyone can do, and nobody seems particularly bothered by that. In March 2020, I lost my startup job and the market was falling apart, and Bill Ackman went on CNBC and gave his performance, and the banners were red and the anchors were grave and everything was markets in turmoil. And I had this very orthogonal experience where on March 15th, I watched the Fed pull out the bazooka, and I knew with a clarity that almost felt physical that they were going to print money and inflate asset prices and drag us out of it. Because that is what they had always done. Because the alternative, letting the market find its own floor, letting the pain distribute itself honestly, was unthinkable to the people whose wealth depended on it never happening. And then I watched the television for months. I watched Ron and Sana come on in April with tremendous confidence about how the market was going to fall apart. I watched Guy Adami and Bob Pisani and Wapner. Wrong with certainty. Wrong with authority. Wrong in a way that costs the unsophisticated ones, the people who participate in the market, not recreationally but desperately, as the last remaining mechanism for building wealth in a country that has foreclosed every other path. And nobody held any of them to account. Maybe they were pushed to say those things. The combination of the moving screen and the paycheck protection program were coordinated in a way that required no conspiracy, only alignments of incentives. And that triggered something in me. A disdain I carried for 4 or 5 months before it metabolized into a depression, and then a detachment that was quieter but no less fundamental. And I've not fully shaken it. I'm not sure I want to. Now I'm pulling apart the spider web because I'm of the belief that the thing everyone insists is not systemic is in fact architecturally systemic in ways the existing frameworks are not designed to detect. Private credit and its insurance spouse, the offshore reinsurance balance sheets in Bermuda, the single points of failure on $10 trillion, the self-mark assets and amortized costs, the narrow feedback loops in which people making decisions have been talking to the same 12 people for so long that they've lost the ability to hear anything that does not confirm what they already believe. John Gray says things publicly that are not the statements of a man who has been challenged in 15 years. They are the statements of a man who has forgotten that challenge is possible. The requirement to know it and not want to be part of it seems to be the brain damage Eminem rapped about. Everyone says the Fed can handle it because the Fed has always handled it, because every single time someone has said the Fed cannot bail us out forever, the Fed has in fact bailed us out again. And the boy has cried wolf so many times and so loudly that now there is a real wolf standing in the clearing and nobody can hear the screaming over the memory of the false alarms. Dropping rates to zero and printing money, which is likely what they will do because it is the only thing they know how to do, would extend the runway while making the eventual landing worse. We are not rolling into whatever comes next with a small balance sheet. We're rolling in heavy. And AI, which is the only reason we're not already in a recession, because if you pulled NVIDIA out of the index, the picture would be genuinely ugly, is also the first technology that could theoretically displace the very people buying the stocks. That is a contradiction nobody seems eager to examine. The boomers, who I describe as 55 and up, own 74% of the wealth. I wonder if they would accept 60%. Would they accept 50? Would 30 be tolerable? Because the way they respond to any criticism, any suggestion that perhaps the arrangement could be slightly different, suggests that they would not accept 73. That any change, however marginal, is received as an existential assault on everything they've built. And what they've built is in a large part a function of having been born into the longest bull market in human history, and having a central bank willing to destroy the currency to protect their portfolios. Meanwhile, the young people have been sidelined into believing a 5% drawdown is always a buying opportunity. Trained to gamble because the old paths, the Warren Buffett path, the 1950s path, 2 cars and 2.5 kids and a house in the suburbs, are closed. Actually closed. Not difficult. Closed. So they parlay. They try to parlay their way into something resembling the life their parents had and took for granted, and defend as if they've earned every cent of it through sheer force of character. What we have is not capitalism. Capitalism is the enshrinement of property rights, not the banishment of property laws. I've said this so many times that the phrase "no more boomer communism" has become almost a joke, almost a brand. But the joke keeps not being funny because the thing it describes keeps being true. We cannot let the markets fall because we need to protect a generation that is rich and accustomed to being rich. And so we print and we backstop and the inequality grows. And when somebody points it out, the word they reach for is communist or fascist, depending on which direction they are facing. On the right, Charlie Kirk is finished, and the audience is drifting towards Nick Fuentes because he is funny, and I find myself watching him because he is funny, and I am not going to vote for him based on his humor, but plenty of people will. On the left, there is AOC and there's Mamdani. And I disagree with them economically on most things. But at least Mamdani showed some charisma. The fact that he showed some charisma is notable. It tells you everything about how low the bar has fallen. Gen X is not going to have a president. Gavin Newsom has no shot. There is a void, a vacuum, and vacuums get filled. That is not a theory, that is a physical law. The question is not whether it will be filled, but by whom and with what. I think about history, the Berlin Wall, and the hippies, and the Russian Revolution, and the National Socialists, and the French Revolutions, and the Protestant Reformation, and the Romans, each emperor, each collapse. And the pattern is always the same. A generation ignored, a charge building the population like a static electricity in a dry room, and the people in power unable to feel it because their feedback loops had narrowed to nothing, because they had spent so long talking to only each other that they had forgotten other people existed. And then the spark, and then the thing nobody saw coming, in the faces that everyone should have seen coming because it was right there, in the faces and the voices and the anger of people who had been told to wait their turn for so long that they stopped believing turns altogether. We have had this Pax Americana for a long time. We have made many mistakes inside of it. We believed in the omnipotence of the Federal Reserve and U.S. dominance forever, and we believe nothing will change because nothing has changed within the memory of the people currently holding the microphones. I see it slipping. I see the phoniness Holden was talking about. I think I finally get it. Not as an intellectual exercise, but as a feeling in the chest, or perhaps a bit lower. The way you understand something, not because someone explained it to you, but because you have lived long enough for the explanation to become unnecessary. I am 31 years old. I'm single. I am not too upset about either of those things. Soon I will be 32, and maybe I will not be single, but I'm more concerned about the country. I'm not asking anyone to panic or retire or shut up. I'm asking for a more collaborative effort, an acknowledgement of the generational gap, an honest accounting of the range of outcomes. Someone to step up and be the new voice. Someone to take the torch and carry it somewhere that is not just a slightly different version of where we have already been.